Hello, everyone. Today we'll begin section 2, the Seeds of Liberty. Here we're primarily focusing on the truth and the idea of having the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence tied to one another. You cannot separate either one of those documents. They are forever are in union together in order to form this more, what they call the more perfect union. Okay, and so there's been a push. Or actually, before that, when studying the Constitution, it is important to start with the Declaration of Independence because the Constitution is the application of the principles set forth in the Declaration. Okay? There is a movement to separate the Declaration from the Constitution because if we, the people, ignore the principles behind it, politicians can distort the actual wording. So this is very important because this idea that all men were created equal and that our liberty comes from one place and one place, period, and that is from God. God, the Creator, is at the head of our governmental system. Okay? Well, if you remove that part of who we are, then you can get the Constitution to mean whatever you want when you remove God. And so if you're a part of a government or a movement and you're trying to take over leadership and replace government or replace God for the government around you, then you have to separate that document. If you can't separate the Declaration of Independence from the Constitution, then the issue of God will always be there. Now, they've done a really good job in systematically chipping away at this idea that God, that our freedom comes from God, our prosperity comes from God, our individuality, our inspiration, our free thinking and speech. These are all come from God. Our provision, right? When we remove prayer from school, when we remove the 10 Commandments from the courthouse, when we no longer teach the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence in schools, when we remove the Bible from the schools, when we do all those things, it's easy, and in its place, we are the explosion of what they call to promote general welfare, which is again is a distortion of what the founding fathers had intended, where people are reliant on the government to fix their problems, to fix the economy, to make things right, to pay for their housing and their food. You see what I'm saying? How like you remove God and in its place you put government institutions that are head up by unelected bureaucrats who have a set agenda to, for lack of a better word, enslave the people that they were called to serve. And so this is very important because if you're trying to replace God with government, the very first thing you have to do is remove the Declaration of Independence as a co-equal document with the Declaration of Independence. And there are 4 reasons the Constitution cannot be separated from the Declaration. Reason number 1, constitutional acts. The Constitution itself and many constitutional acts date themselves from the date of the Declaration of Independence. So to this day, when there's a constitutional act, when there's a bill that's gone through the House and Senate and is sitting on the president's desk, and he or her signs that into law, at the bottom of that you'll see 1776, not when the Constitution was created. And so it goes back to our Declaration. All constitutional acts that we do, even today, go back to the Declaration of Independence. In the second one, enabling acts. So the legislation for becoming a state requirement applicants' territories to follow the principles of the Declaration and the wording of the Constitution. Okay, so at the time, colonies, as part of joining the Union, right, having representation as one government, separate states, but one government overseeing everything, they had to first put into effect a state constitution that met the same criteria as the others. Okay? That honored the acknowledgement of the Declaration of Independence. The principles, the timeless principles of the Declaration of Independence. U.S. Code, the third is U.S. Codes, Organic Laws. The current federal code lists 4 organic laws that no other law may violate, among which are the Declaration and the Constitution. So no other laws can violate those two documents, those two good documents that are tied to one another. The fourth one, grievance corollaries. So many provisions in the Constitution directly address grievances listed in the Constitution. That's the Declaration of Independence is first acknowledging that God is the creator, right? He's creator. Freedom is given to him, is given to us by God the creator, and that we're all men were created equal. And then we begin to with having that foundational really revelation, then we can begin to, it was a systematic itemization of grievances in the Declaration as to why we were declaring our freedom, right? And the Constitution that was set forth was, they directly addressed those grievances. Grievances, ranging from, trial without jury, the right to a speedy trial, quartering. You could not, the English officers, if they were out in the country and they needed provision, shelter, they had the right under the Crown's authority to kill your livestock, feed them, eat the food, whatever you had, and literally remove the people within your home so that the soldiers or officers have a place to sleep. Well, that was one of the grievances in the Declaration of Independence, and there's provisions in the Constitution that address those things. And so you have the grievances, the issues, the reason why that we're declaring our independence from the Crown. And then the Constitution was the actual application of that, was the things that we're going forward, we were going to put in writing that these things are never to happen. Basically, what we would call today is government overreach, to prevent that from happening in the future. John Quincy Adams. This is at the Jubilee of the Constitution. This is what he said. He said, "The virtue which had been infused into the Constitution of the United States was no other than the consecration of those abstract principles, which had been first proclaimed in the Declaration of Independence." So there it is. He's tying them together. This was the platform upon which the Constitution of the United States had been erected. Think about it. So think of it as a revelation of God, right? And so of the man who built his home the one who built his home on sand, and he had the one who built it on the rock. Okay, we built our revelation of who God was or is, in His plan and purpose for our lives, and that the freedom that we were born with was given only from God. I keep going to it because it's the seeds of liberty. This is where everything was birthed out of. Okay, and so this revelation, right, on the rock, the foundation, the cornerstone being Jesus, then you can build upon that revelation of truth. So here it is, was the platform in which the Constitution, the framework of the United States had been erected. Its virtues, its Republican charter, consisted in this conformity to the principles proclaimed in the Declaration of Independence, and as its administration was to depend on the virtue, or in other words, of those principles in the Declaration of Independence and embodied in the Constitution of the United States. So this is ironclad, okay? We're talking about John Quincy Adams. He was there formulating the Declaration of Independence. He was part of that process, and he's saying, no, you cannot separate the two. They're vitally connected to one another, being the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. In business terms, the Declaration of Independence is like the Articles of Incorporation, telling who we are and what we're about. And the Constitution is like the bylaws, telling how the business will operate. Before the formation of the Constitution, the Declaration was received by all states in the Union and has never been disannulled. Samuel Adams, founder of the American Revolution, the father of the American Revolution. So the Constitution is but the body and the letter of which the former is the thought and spirit, the former being the Declaration of Independence. And it is always safe to read the letter of the Constitution in the spirit of the Declaration of Independence. So again, the body, which is the Constitution, and then the Declaration actually being the thoughts and the spirit. So it's first here, but it's part of the whole system in order to make it work. And if you understand both those documents, then you can't distort what, I guess, the wording and the intent of the Declaration of Independence, of the Constitution. On June 7th, 1776, Richard Henry Lee from Virginia made the following motion for our independence and was seconded by John Adams. Here it is. So resolved that these united colonies are of one, of right, ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved of all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the rule of Great Britain ought to be totally dissolved. I mean, that's pretty cut and dry. They were ending the relationship between the colonies and the King of England and Great Britain as a whole. So the members of the committee appointed on June the 11th to draft the Declaration of Independence consisted of Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. Which three states voted against the independence on July 1st, 1776? It was three. It was Delaware, Pennsylvania, and South Carolina. Caesar Rodney made a midnight 80-mile horseback ride to reach Pennsylvania just in time to cast a tie-breaking vote for Delaware to support independence when the vote was taken again. So this was the turning point for this. It had, in order for them to do what they needed to do, which was declare separation from the crown, claim their independence, there could not be a single person that was not in agreement with this decision. There could not be division. The Word of God clearly states that, or Jesus says that a house divided will not stand. And if it was the revelation of God, of who He is and who we are in His likeness, we could not establish this country with division. That speaks to God's law. It speaks to operating with an authority. And so it was imperative that they had a unanimous decision as one body going in one direction. And, and Rodney, 80 miles. It was non-stop, day, night, to get to Independence Hall to cast his vote. And it was literally going on as he walked in. And of course, when he made his decision, the other two fell in line, and the rest is history. To this day, if you look at the quarter for Rodney, you'll see it's him on a horse riding to Pennsylvania to make that decision to declare independence. The farmer's formula for lasting freedom. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal, and that they were endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The Declaration of Independence includes 4 essential principles, the key word, principles, that hold our freedom firmly in place. Number 1, self-evident truths. The undeniable fact that moral absolutes exist. Okay? Moral absolutes exist. The reason why, this notion where they say, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution it was established by old, dry men, white men who were slave owners, and the way they thought. We've evolved since then, right? This idea of a living and breathing Constitution is really about a distortion of what it meant, and that if you use specific instances or issues to deal with problems, yes, things become outdated. But when you use timeless principles, when you honor your father, your mother, and your father, right? When you don't lie, you don't steal, you don't kill, right? These are principles that will stand the test of time. The issues of lying, stealing, and cheating, killing, dishonoring your mother and father, they were issues back then. They were issues 2,000 years prior to that, and they're issues 2,000 years from now, until the day in which our Lord and Savior comes and establishes His government in place. we will have all these issues. We'll be dealing with them until then. And so when we use timeless principles as the pillars in which everything stands upon, it doesn't matter how sophisticated our society becomes, at the root of it, we're still dealing with those issues. Endowed by our Creator, our inalienable rights, or our inalienable right to individual freedom comes from God. No man, no woman, no government agency, no government at all, no dictator, no despot, no oligarchy, no aristocracy gives us our freedom. It comes from one place and one place only, and that is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He gives us our life. He wove us into existence in the womb. Freedom comes only from God. The consent of the governed. We have a voice in our government. Okay. The consent of government, and just like we have medical consent, it's in order for a procedure to take place, we have to know the pros, the cons, the risks versus the reward. We need to know about every possible thing that can go wrong and go right, but we make that decision with everything on the table. That's medical consent. Same thing as it pertains to government. Government is a necessary tool in order to provide justice, tranquility, defense, to ensure our liberties, right? To promote general welfare, the things that we talk that are in the preamble. Government is necessary, right? The framework or the bylaws to execute that, to provide those protections. With that being said, with the consent of the governed, this is the critical component, right? As citizens operating or living in that governmental system, it is our duty. It's not we should, we get around to it. No, it's our civic duty. It is a requirement. When we don't engage in what's going on in the governmental system, what happens is where we find ourselves today. When politicians, lobbyists, unelected bureaucrats within the deep state, you find a complete chaos, and where the system was originally designed to protect us in living out our pursuit of happiness, now it literally becomes a tyrannical system, because when we forfeit our authority to operate within that governmental system, that system then will gladly take that authority that we forfeited and use it against us. It's called the way it is, the fallen nature of man. That's the reason why they created the system, the consent of the governed, to prevent that from happening. But when we have our people who have given up, disinterested, they're more concerned about life or about paying bills, or there's no time for it. You can give a litany of excuses as to why people have come disengaged with the governmental process. The net result is that the system itself has now turned against us. But the good news is, all it takes is for the people to get involved. But our system literally has the foundation of having our voice heard. And it just takes effort and a willingness to participate. The pursuit of happiness. The importance of free enterprise to our freedom. I talked about this the other day. This was a good example. Is that when Trump won the 2016 election, they called it the revolution of social media. And see, I was thinking about this. What made Trump is the fact that he was birthed, and everything that he has, all the success that he had, came out of the free enterprise. Now, did he fail? Absolutely. There's documented failures of his failures, but that doesn't. No one said that we wouldn't fail, but you keep getting up and you try again, and where you failed, you make adjustments and you do better. Well, here it is. You have Trump comes along and he says, "Look, the best way for me to reach people effectively, not just effectively, but inexpensively, was through social media." And so there was an explosion in social media where all the mainstream media was going against him. He bypassed all that and went straight to the people's accounts and reached them individually and addressed the issues of the people. That's free enterprise. That's understanding the terrain and looking, see, how can I make adjustments and be successful? And it was proven to do so. That's why when he lost in 2020, the very first thing they did was they removed him from social media. They silenced him. And they began to silence the people who believed in him. Okay? Here it is, 2024. President-elect, all the mainstream media is talking about this. This was the election. This was a revolutionary election, and it took place on podcasts. So here it is. Again, now you had individuals, right? Not big tech giants now. Now you're talking about thousands of individuals, entrepreneurs, free enterprise, thinking, well, I can't operate within the social media realm, so I'll do a podcast. This was an election win utilizing podcasts. Charlie Kirk, The War Room, you name it. Individuals that went on there and talked about the issues that we were going through, and people began to stop watching mainstream media and all the avenues they have there and started going to podcasts for their news, for the truth, talking about real issues. Again, that's what happens in a free enterprise. Understanding that regardless if the government comes in there and they try to censor you, working collusion with the media, and whether it be legacy media and big tech companies, you had a segment of people that shifted and said, no, we're going to go this way. That's a prime example of how free enterprise operates. And when it works, it works. You don't have to subsidize it. The government doesn't have to go in there and try to promote it. When it works, it works. That's the beauty of free enterprise. So self-evident truths and endowed by our Creator. So the American Revolution was liberty with God. And it led to the most successful nation in history of the world. And the French Revolution was liberty without God, which led to the guillotine and total chaos. So here it is. You had a European country in France. Leading up to then, you had the rule of kings, right? The lineage, the bloodline of kings ordained by God. Okay, and then there was a switch where we were, again, our country was under the authority of the King of England. And say the same type of rule, different, but similar in that regard. But here it is. There was two revolutions that were going at the same time. Our country was liberty with God. France, their revolution was liberty without God. That means to do as you see fit, do as you will, right? There's no moral absolutes. If you want to If you want to have sex, you want to do whatever, you are free to do so without condemnation. You can do it freely. And what happened? Total chaos in France. The guillotine was the era of the guillotine, and it was the demise of their country. Meanwhile, America, there was an explosion in creativity and industry. The normal model of government in 1776 was based on the idea that power flowed from God to the king and to the people. The American model of government reversed the last two, so that the power flowed from God directly to the people, then given to government only as the people deemed appropriate. Think about that. So the way the world had existed since the very beginning, since before recorded human history, is that this idea that you had the oligarchy, the aristocrats, royal blood, if you will, the elites, right? In every society, you see that. Regardless if it was England, if it was in South America, you saw that. There's always been elites that dealt with the higher power, and then they chose how to give that freedom or the blessing or the direction of that community or that society. Well, 1776, we said no longer. No longer do we have to deal with either a bloodline or a dictator. Now, God deals directly with every individual. And government's role was to serve and to be in servitude to the individual, the consent of the governed. If government does not give us our freedom, then government cannot rightfully take it away. If government does not give us our freedom, then government cannot rightfully take it away. But if we don't know the difference, then they end up taking it away. Thomas Jefferson even noted that the firm basis of liberty was for people to remember that liberty was a gift from God. When delegates to the Constitution Convention began to despair, Benjamin Franklin, the elder statesman, spoke on June 28, 1787, in an attempt to get the delegates back on track. This was a very long quote, but I took it down just to one little part. Therefore, I beg to leave to move hath henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessing in our deliberations to be held at this assembly every morning before we proceed to business. Benjamin Franklin Declaration and Constitutional Signer. So here it is. Benjamin Franklin, probably even at that time and today, acknowledged as the least believer in God. Okay, people with secular views point to Benjamin and say, he had nothing to do with God. No, he did. There was always an awareness of God. Okay, whether he lived out his life, in obedience to Him, that's obviously up for debate and well-founded. However, he understood that from the very beginning, from the point they signed that Declaration of Independence, their death warrant, okay, through the Revolutionary War and up until that point, it literally was the providence of God, the hand of God. There were so many times they were on the the edge, on the razor's edge of being defeated, ultimately defeated by the crown and having everything destroyed. Time and time again, it was providence. It was decision making. It was anything from even if, there was a one of the first battles that Washington got involved in. He was at the Lexington and Concord, and his men were out in the island, and they were literally being surrounded by the British, and not all of the entire army, but the majority of the army was there. It would have been a complete annihilation. Found praying to God to help them out. And here it is, the fog comes in, the British army can't see, they can't attack, and then in the fog, they evacuate all the soldiers. I think maybe a couple hundred were left, maybe less. By the time the British found out, George Washington's army had formatted again and positioned themselves to defend, and it basically would have taken an opportunity for the crown to really destroy the army in one battle. Went on to win. All the time, Washington's officers would run into Washington as he was praying, on his knees praying. These guys, they prayed continually, praying that that their families and their lands wouldn't get destroyed, which a lot of them did. There were a lot of them who lost land, family members, wives, sons, daughters, brothers, and sisters. It was always there was a price that was paid, and they're willing to pay it. But God put them in a place to succeed, and he's saying, look, we're only here because of God's protection. It was through our prayers, continual prayers, and God's protection over our lives, and for this new country, preserving this idea, that this revelation that God was the creator, and He's given us all this. So the guy stands up and says, look, before we move forward, the convention was on the eve of total disaster. They were getting ready to disband it and not do this constitution, and they were going to have just the 13 individual states as separate countries. But that wasn't what it was about. Remember when they signed the Declaration of Independence, it was unanimous. In order for them to go forward as one, they had to be in unity. And here it is. When the Constitutional Convention was on the brink of disbanding, it took Benjamin Franklin, the least one of the men who had the least amount of, we would say, walking with God. It took him saying, look, God got us here, and God is going to keep us going from this point on. And we need that spirit of unity and prayer every day in order for us to hammer out these details. That's what they did. And from that point on, they began to work things out. James Madison, the father of the Constitution. The real wonder, this is response to, after the prayer began to work and the Constitution was created. Here it is. The real wonder that is that the Constitutional Convention overcame so many difficulties. And to overcome them was so much agreement, was as unprecedented as it was unexpected. It is impossible for the pious man not to recognize in it a finger of that mighty hand which was so frequently extended to us in critical stages of the revolution. So again, just re-emphasizing that so many times the hand of God was over them, delivering them from complete destruction. Here it is, again, working out those disagreements in unity and getting that Constitution ratified. Alexander Hamilton, constitutional signer and co-author of the Federalist Papers. For my own part, I sincerely esteem a system which, without the finger of God, never could have been suggested and agreed upon by such a diversity of interests. So, so when we talk about the influence of God in, and not just the Declaration of Independence, but also the Constitution, according to the University of Houston study, roughly 15,000 writings of the Founding Fathers. The most often frequent sources used by the Founding Fathers were, going from lowest to the highest. So the fourth most was was Locke, John Locke. The third was Blackstone. The second was Montesquieu, and the most cited was the Bible. Many phrases of the Declaration of Independence were originally preached by Reverend John Wise, whose sermons were reprinted and published by the Founding Fathers before the Revolution. You also can the Founding Fathers, but they also have been nicknamed the Sons of Liberty. The pursuit of happiness. I'll wrap this up because I'm coming up on the 1 hour. Apologize. The pursuit of happiness. Thomas Jefferson. As a wise and frugal government, which shall leave men free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, shall not take from the mouth of labor bread it has earned. This is the sum of a good government. William Bradford and the Pilgrims tried socialism, which Governor Bradford said caused much confusion and discontent, and retarded much employment, and had been to their benefit and comfort, and caused people to allege weakness and inability. Basically, if there was ever a time in order for communism to flourish, it would have been when you got off that boat and it was just you and like-minded individuals seeking a new life, a new beginning, opportunity. It was really, you had the cleanest slates of cleanest slates. And all you had to do is work, put into the community storehouse at center of the village, and everyone would take as they need. It was a complete and utter disaster. They nearly starved to death. And that people were faking illness. They just weren't working. It's, again, this idea of communism, the cult. Our belief system as believers, we believe that man has fallen, where the wages of sin has earned us death and separation from God, and it's only by the blood of Jesus that we can live our eternal lives in heaven with the Father. Well, communism, they believe that man is inherently good, and that you just need the infrastructure in place to bring that out. It doesn't work. Without God, man is doomed. So yeah, after starving literally to death, many of them, Bradford made two very important changes, implementing private property and free enterprise. They soon, when they did that, when they say, "Hey, this is your land, and if you make it, you want to make enough just for you to live on, if you want to make enough for you and the village or whatever," then at that point, when there was ownership in what they had, not only did they have enough for their families and for their village, but now they begin to export their goods for enterprise. It works. They were soon exporting and corn and thriving. Consent of the governed. According to President James Garfield, Who is to blame? Who is to blame when we have a Congress that is out of control and foolish? Who's to blame? Ourselves. Controlling the political forces simply means giving or refusing our consent. If we want to uphold the Constitution, we have to make wise decisions in choosing our leaders to be part of the process and be engaged in our government. It's simple. It's a very simple recipe, but this requires participation on our part. So 6 immutable principles in the Declaration of Independence. There is a divine creator. Believing in a divine creator is a first step toward limited government. Because of government is all supreme, there is nothing that can impose limits. If God is not in the national equation, then government becomes God. Limited government comes from God. Every person has a set of rights given by the Creator, not government, which government has no authority to interfere with. Government exists to protect the inalienable rights. Government is not there to provide for us, but to protect us while we go out and produce. The more government provides for us, the less to protect us while we go out and produce, the more the government provides for us, the less prosperous we are because we have less initiative we have. So the more they give us, the more we're willing to go out and get it. We become lazy. We rely on the hand of the government versus God. There is a fixed moral law. A lack of a fixed moral law leads to anarchy, where every person gets to decide for themselves what is right and what is wrong, and the power control the weak. The powerful control the weak. John Quincy Adams calls this the law of the tiger and the shark. The rights of the government or the will of the majority, this principle only follows the principles stated in that our inalienable moral law and inalienable rights and a fixed moral law. The people's right to change their government, because government comes from the people. We can change our government in any way needed if the first 5 principles are violated. So anytime if they're ever violated, the people, if they're engaged, have the power to change it back. Richard Henry Lee said that Thomas Jefferson copied the Declaration of Independence from John Locke's book, The Two Treatises of Government, which cites the Bible over 1,500 times to show the proper operation of civil government. Historians have documented that every right set forth in the Declaration of Independence had been preached from American pulpit prior to 1763. And in George Washington's day, duty meant a legal, binding, contractual obligation. Okay. So just to wrap things up, there is no doubt that the founding fathers had a biblical worldview. Whether it was Benjamin Franklin, who was on one end, you could even say, backslidden, half in, half out Christian life, whatever you want to say. But had the at least awareness that, hey, there is a God, and we pray to him, he will show up and bring unity. On the other end, when you had the Sons of Liberty who read the sermons of John Wise, who were devout Christians, who lived their lives with integrity and obedience to God, and had that revelation that their freedoms came from God. Wherever those men were, on one end of the spectrum to the other, they all had at least the bare minimum of reverence and understood that when it came to governmental structure, the Word of God was really the fountain of truth that they dipped into to establish this country. So you cannot, when you walk away from this thing, you have to understand where the liberties came from God the Creator. You cannot separate the two documents, the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. And it clearly defines that the grievances in the Declaration were dealt with in the Constitution. And that framework, upon the revelation of God, that foundation, that framework was built upon, the framework of the Constitution, and the revelation of God, and Jesus, his Son, is that cornerstone. It made us the greatest country to ever exist, and it came from the revelation of God. Our revelation that our liberty came from God versus the revolution in France, which was freedom from God, which led to the guillotine and total destruction and chaos in that country. I thank you today. Class is dismissed, and God bless you.